Hi everybody, Ross here, and I'm now back at my desk to start my last year in Munich after a very, very cool summer holiday. That included a trip to Slough, 2 triathlons in the UK, a week on a French beach, a hot Toulouse city break, and 4 days in Chamonix to watch the UTMB. Currently, I'm putting the finishing touches to some new podcast episodes. When the research and writing is done, I'll get Luke on the line, if he's not logging huge yardage at the Newbury Natatorium. Listening back to TSP0 recently, I realised I need to get back to the goals and ideas that I set out there, and reboot the project somewhat. I'm also being inspired at the moment by reading The History of Surfing by Matt Warshaw. It's a ginormous book, so tackling the nearly 500 pages and 250,000 words cover to cover will be a long-term endeavour. But I'm reminded that I need to keep writing and recording triathlon history stories. Luke and I like doing it, and it seems plenty of people like reading and listening. So over the next couple of weeks, I'll re-edit some of the old episodes before putting them back in the feed. I'll also do some general website tweaks, like fixing links and correcting spelling mistakes. So don't worry if any of your favourite stuff disappears, it will come back. Another reason to rethink and refresh the Streak Podcast project is because I want to start telling some stories about modern triathlon. For example, you probably know that I'm really into local triathlon scenes and doing low-key, short, affordable events. Those that are still put on by clubs, towns, or maybe small-scale promotions companies. So I'll start taking you along to the races I do, as well as on any epic spectating trips I take. For example, I get to Roth most years. I'm also really into the French Grand Prix and the German Bundesliga, competitions that started in the 1990s but have roots in the 1980s and are still relevant today, as a stepping stone to international competition or as a goal in itself for the journeyman semi-pro, like I was in the mid-1990s. These two competitions are the top of the French and German multi-layered club competition, a scene that is little understood outside of those countries. So on the podcast, I'll take you through how the leagues work and try to travel to a few events. But let's link to some triathlon history here. In early 1989, Mark Allen also realised he needed a reboot and refresh after his 1988 triathlon season, which was a good but not great year, especially as he focused fully on the Hawaii Ironman again by not going to Nice for the second year running to try and finally net the big one. So 5th place after 2 punches was not part of the master plan. Yet Mark's 1988 included wins at the Gold Coast World Cup, Avignon, Vancouver, Seta and Bermuda, as well as second-place finishes at St. Croix, the Jeep Tri-Prix in Oceanside, the unofficial World Short Course Championships in Kelowna, and the USTS Finals in Hilton Head. All of these losses were to Mike Pigg, so not surprisingly, Mark also lost his Triathlete of the Year title to Pigg, whose body of work included 18 triathlon starts, garnering an astonishing 13 wins. 1989 was going to be Mark's most important season yet, with the first official World Short Course Championships due to take place in Avignon, where he and Pigg would be joint short odds favourites. And although we didn't know it yet, a refreshed new father, Dave Scott, would be hoping to add to his 6 Hawaii Ironman wins and deny the grip again. Surely he deserved it by now. So Mark took off to New Zealand, and I was fascinated by the article about the trip that appeared in the August 1989 issue of Triathlete USA. Here it is. Lyttleton, New Zealand's unlikely training centre. Story and photos by Richard Graham. However picturesque in certain conditions of weather and light, it must be admitted that the hills and bays of Lyttleton hardly rival in scenic attraction those of Akaroa or indeed of other New Zealand inlets. Lyttleton can appear to be a bleak and unhomely place. W. H. Scotter in A History of Lyttleton. Scotter had a point. At first impression, with its hills burnt brown by the sun and grey clouds casting dreary shadows on the ships being loaded at its busy docks, Lyttleton certainly isn't the picturesque little harbour town one would expect to find in New Zealand. But this past March, the little suburb of nearby Christchurch turned into an unlikely training centre for top triathletes Mark Allen, Julie Moss, Colleen Cannon, Erin Baker and Scott Molina. Baker and Molina arrived late last December, Cannon and her husband Howard Koshansky in January. Lorraine Moller, a top New Zealand marathon runner, had given Cannon and Koshansky airline tickets as a wedding gift. Being in Colorado for the past couple of winters, we haven't been able to ride due to the deep snow, Cannon said. So when Erin invited us to stay with her in Lyttleton, we decided to go. When Allen and Moss showed up in early March, Baker set them up with a place to stay in the oceanside town of Sumner, about 5 miles away. Baker, Molina, Cannon and Koshansky stayed at Baker's place, a 130-year-old house built from the timbers of one of the first 4 ships to sail into Lyttleton Harbour in 1770. The attraction of the area, number one, is that Erin lives here, Molina said in his typically understated style. Lyttleton and Christchurch, called the most English city outside England, also offered consistent weather for training, very little traffic on the roads surrounding Lyttleton, varied terrain for cycling and running, and few distractions. One last bite to eat before bedtime passed for nightlife at the Baker household. It was the height of summer when Baker and Molina arrived in New Zealand. Like Cannon, the two had spent the last few winters in Colorado, kept inside on turbo trainers by the Rocky Mountain weather. In Lyttleton, while Colorado athletes were still sweeping snow from their porches, the triathletes rode and ran in the hills near town or on the flat plains surrounding Christchurch, did run intervals at a track, and swam at the Aqua Gym, an 8-lane 25-metre swimming facility dedicated by none other than Erin Baker. "I snipped the ribbon," she admitted. When I arrived in Lyttleton, after the March the 12th Kiwi Lager Ironman, the entire gang was out training, with St Croix's America's Paradise Triathlon and Australia's World Cup Triathlon just weeks away. It was rare when the triathletes weren't out swimming, cycling or running. When at home, they were either resting or eating. Howard Koshansky cooked for the group. His huge dinners of stir-fried vegetables, fruit salads and casseroles, accompanied by all sorts of breads and muffins, were attacked with gusto by the voracious athletes. When he wasn't cooking, Koshansky spent time kayaking with friends he'd made at the Aqua Gym or working on a novel he was writing. "It's a sort of The Catcher in the Rye for the 90s, he said. The dual dynamic of being isolated but with a supportive group of other triathletes simultaneously helped the training go smoothly. If a group of people weren't here, it would be tougher to get motivated to train, said Cannon. While the Lyttleton group trained, rumours grew stateside. People wondered what we were doing down here, Cannon laughed. Like Dave Scott, who trains alone in Davis, California, the Lyttleton triathletes were subject to much curiosity, and mystique grew. Everybody from San Diego was wondering what was going on, Cannon said. People worried. They thought we must really be doing some outrageous training. But it was a vacation too. On one day that was typical of their training schedule, Baker and Cannon cycled 15 miles into Christchurch, ran 6 times 1,000 on the track, rode for another 2 hours on the hills near Lyttleton, then did a super swim at 2 p.m. It's swim until you drop, said Baker. Just listening to their workout plans sounded tiring. Another day, the group took a ferry across Lyttleton Harbour for a casual run to the top of a hill that never seemed to end. Each time they reached what they thought was the final crest, another hill rose even higher above. Once back at the bottom for lunch, Molina complained about Alan's pace. "Mark can't run slow," he said. At lunch, Cannon, a notorious food filcher, made trades for food. My veggies for a bit of your chicken, then took an inch off the top of everyone's chocolate shakes when the group made the mistake of allowing her to go and pick them up from the counter. Cannon was the most new age athlete in the group. She had 3 water bottles that she placed out in the sun in front of Baker's house, each wrapped in a different colour of cellophane. Red was for energy, blue for calm, green for healing. When I voiced my doubts to Molina, he said he was sceptical too. Racing locally was another form of training. In February, Molina placed second to Rick Wells at the Christchurch Kiwi Lager Triathlon, and Baker finished 5th at Drake 5K in Auckland in a world-class time of 15:27. On the day I left for Los Angeles, Molina was invited to present athletic awards at the Shirley Boys High School in Christchurch. When the boys were told the distances of the Hawaii Ironman that Molina had won, low whistles and exchanged wide-eyed glances showed that the standing room only crowd in the school's large auditorium was indeed impressed. Epilogue. If anyone had wondered about the effectiveness of training in a small group in an isolated location, all doubts were sooner erased. 6 weeks after my visit, Erin Baker and Alan had won the America's Paradise Triathlon in St Croix. Alan and Moss had emerged victorious at the World Cup Triathlon in Australia, and Molina and Cannon had placed 5th and 8th at St Croix, respectively. And on one weekend in May, Molina won Bud Light Bakersfield and placed 2nd at Bud Light USTS Phoenix. The athletes weren't the only ones who had benefited from Lyttleton's isolation and quiet. Howard Koshansky had finished his novel and was shopping it around to publishers. While it's obvious that W.H. Cotter didn't think much of the small harbour town's scenic charms, it's just as certain that Erin Baker and her merry band of triathletes considered Lyttleton one of the most beautiful spots in the world. One feature I'll be adding to the show notes at thestreakpodcast.com is a link to my podcast script, if you'd rather read than listen. Another school year brings a different work and leisure timetable. I'll definitely have more time for the Streak podcast this year, because I think it's now or never for the project, in terms of getting it out there. That's why I'll also be doing more on YouTube. This summer I made a few very short videos, just to get a bit better at filming and editing. The blog will also be back near daily, and I'm on Instagram again, with the comments open. I had them turned off, as I just needed to unplug for a while. So let's keep the vintage triathlon chat going over there. But as always, all nice messages from listeners are welcome, whether that be via DM, an email, or a comment under the show notes. Regular readers might have noticed I've taken the link to the magazines down. I kept it open for about a year, as the plan was to get other people to scan and add their collection to the archive. But that didn't really happen as I'd hoped, and I'm sure some people just downloaded the whole folder. Not a problem. I hope you're enjoying them. I'll continue adding the rest of my issues, though, to use for podcast and blog research and to post in the show notes. Get in touch if you want to read a particular issue. I do reset the permissions occasionally, so don't hesitate to ask again if that happens to you. I'm also sketching out some ideas of what else the Streak podcast could offer. Maybe some basic merch, like stickers, an artisanal zine-style print magazine, or a vintage triathlon meetup, ideally somewhere in France in August. If you go to the website now at thestreakpodcast.com, you'll see that I've also added a Buy Me a Coffee link. Buy Me a Coffee is a donation platform for online creators. Their slogan is, "Give your audience an easy way to say thanks." So, go there if you like what we're doing and would like to support the project. Obviously, there's no obligation to do this, and at the moment, everything we do will still be available to everybody. What I podcast or blog are triathlon stories that I find interesting at the time. I'm not really trying to create a chronological history of the sport. But definitely email me if you have any ideas or particular things you'd like to know more about. I'll do a blog post if it's quick, or a podcast if the topic needs some deeper research. So send me your ideas to thestreakpodcast@gmail.com. Speak to you again soon.